Getting rich isn't about a high salary. It's about knowing the rules of the game. There's a half-joking, half-true saying in the finance world. A billionaire won't bother picking up a $100 bill off the ground because in the time it takes to bend down, they've already made more than that. It sounds absurd, but buried in that joke is a truth most people miss. The wealthy don't earn money the way we think they do. Many believe that to become rich, you need a high salary, a fancy job title, or to grind like a machine day and night. But ironically, some of the wealthiest people on earth, like Bernard Arnault, LVMH, Oprah Winfrey, or Satya Nadella, barely live off a paycheck. Their base salaries are often just tens of thousands yearly, less than many middle-class Americans. Why? Salary is the most heavily taxed form of income. In the US, high earners can lose up to 37% of their income to federal taxes, not including state and payroll taxes. The more you earn, the more you lose, and the rich understand that better than anyone. So how do they build wealth? They don't chase income, they accumulate assets. They don't sell, they hold and borrow, and they don't die in debt. They pass down clean, tax-efficient legacies through a strategy known as buy, borrow, die. There's no magic trick here. It's just a different rule book, one you were never taught. The wealthy use their assets to avoid taxes, keep cash flowing, and transfer wealth to the next generation without getting drained by the system. So here's the real question. If they're playing chess, why are you still playing rock, paper, scissors? In this video, we'll break down the strategy of buy, borrow, die, the method global elites use to stay rich for decades. Not to admire it, but to understand the game and start playing it smarter. Why? Income is a problem for the rich. For most people, income is the goal. You study hard to get a good job. You work long hours, hoping for a raise. You live off the money that hits your account each month. But to the wealthy, income is something to be avoided. Why? Because income, especially earned income from a job, is the most heavily taxed form of money in the modern financial system. In the US, if you're a high earner, you could lose up to 37% of your income just to federal taxes before state and payroll taxes. That means nearly half of what you earn disappears before spending a dollar. That's precisely why the truly rich avoid income like the plague. They don't take high salaries, at least not on paper. Instead, they take stock options, or ownership stakes. And here's the key. They don't sell. Why? Because you're only taxed when you sell. As long as you hold your assets, even if their value increases tenfold, you owe zero taxes. That's called an unrealized gain. Take Larry Page, co-founder of Google, as an example. He's worth tens of billions, but lives quietly, with no significant income. He doesn't sell his Google stock, doesn't live off a big salary, and rarely shows up on any highest-paid lists. Yet, he's wealthier than many small countries, simply because he understands one thing. Income is a trap, not a path. At its core, the rich know that earned income is the lowest form of making money. It drains your time and energy and gets taxed to death. Meanwhile, asset-based income, like dividends, capital gains, and investment returns, not only gets taxed at lower rates, it can be deferred for decades if you don't sell. If you're still chasing the goal of making $10,000 a month from a job, you might be on the wrong track. There's nothing wrong with hard work. However, your real goal should be building assets that create value without you trading your time directly. That's the difference between the rich and those stuck in the hamster wheel of earn-spend tax. Assets, the rich person's ultimate tax shield. Regular people earn money through labor. The wealthy earn money through assets. And here's the truth. Assets are the most powerful tax shield in the world for the rich. When most people get money, they put it in a bank, buy a car, or splurge on expensive stuff. But the rich do the opposite. They don't sit on cash. They turn it into assets that grow in value over time, like stocks, real estate, business equity, or even fine art collections. Why? Because assets aren't taxed unless you sell them. This is the golden rule of the US tax system, and many others around the world. The realization principle. You only pay taxes when gains are realized. That means you could invest $1 million into stocks, watch it grow to $10 million over 10 years, and as long as you don't sell, you owe $0 in tax. That's what's known as unrealized gains. Need a real-world example? Look at Reed Hastings, founder of Netflix. His wealth doesn't sit in a bank account. It lives in millions of shares of Netflix stock. As the stock price rises, so does his net worth. But since he doesn't sell, he pays no capital gains tax. Instead of cashing out, he uses those shares as collateral to borrow from the bank. We'll break down a strategy in the next section. This explains why many of the wealthiest people on earth report shockingly low taxable income. They don't live off salaries, they don't sell their assets, they spend borrowed money, backed by appreciating assets, often at low interest rates. Meanwhile, wage earners get taxed on their very first dollar. In today's financial system, it's not hard work that's rewarded. It's asset ownership. You could work 80 hours a week and still pay 35% in income taxes. But someone with $100 million in assets could live luxuriously and pay next to nothing in taxes. If your primary financial focus is still earning more each month, maybe it's time to rethink the game. Because in the world of the rich, it's not income, it's assets that creates absolute freedom. The rich borrow to spend, not to repay. If the average person borrows money to buy a house or a car and then spends 20 to 30 years paying it off, the rich borrow money to spend, invest, and enjoy life without having to pay it back immediately. Sounds backward, doesn't it? But this is a sophisticated financial strategy, turning appreciating assets into a tax-free cash machine by borrowing against them. Take someone like Oprah Winfrey, one of the wealthiest women on the planet. She holds most of her wealth in media companies and real estate. She doesn't need to sell assets to get cash. She borrows from banks, using those assets as collateral, and spends the money freely at incredibly low interest rates. And because nothing is sold, no taxes are triggered. Here's the key. The rich don't borrow because they're broke. They borrow because they have valuable assets to back the loan. They're seen as low risk, so banks line up to offer them tens of millions of dollars at preferred rates, sometimes lower than inflation itself. Now, let's compare. An average person takes out a $20,000 mortgage, repays it for 20 years, taxed on income, scrutinized by the bank at every step. A wealthy individual holds $4 million in stocks, borrows $2 million to spend or invest. No taxes, low interest, no pressure to repay principal. Why does this happen? Because banks don't prioritize high earners, they prioritize asset holders. Assets are the ultimate security. You don't need a high paycheck. You just need equity, property, or stable investments. And suddenly, banks treat you like royalty. Most importantly, loans are not taxable. Legally speaking, borrowed money isn't income. This is one of the most apparent financial divides between the working class and the elite. Workers borrow to consume and carry debt. The wealthy borrow to invest and grow richer. The rich don't need to earn money to live. They borrow against their assets, spend like millionaires, without shrinking the value of their core holdings. This isn't tax evasion. This is understanding the rules deeply enough to turn them into wealth-building tools. Why banks favor the rich? Ever wonder why low-income earners struggle to get a loan? While wealthy individuals can borrow tens of millions with a single phone call, the answer is simple. Banks don't judge you by how much you earn. They judge you by how financially secure you are. You could earn $8,000 a month but have no assets. You'd still be considered high risk. Meanwhile, someone with $2 million in investments but only a small monthly income, they're priority clients. Here's why. 1. Assets are collateral. Income is just a promise. If you own stocks, real estate, or a growing business, you hold tangible, valuable assets that banks can appraise and secure against. That's what banks love. Imagine you're Reed Hastings, co-founder of Netflix, and you hold $500 million in Netflix shares. You don't need to apply for a loan. The bank will come to you, offering hundreds of millions in credit at just 1 to 3% interest. To them, you're not a borrower. You're a low-risk profit partner. 2. The rich borrow conservatively, extremely low risk. The average person might borrow 90% of a home's value. The wealthy, they borrow only 30 to 50% of their asset value. This makes default virtually impossible, and when risk is nearly zero, banks are more than happy to lend. 3. The wealthy don't just borrow, they're full-spectrum financial clients. Don't think the rich only go to banks for loans. They also invest through the bank, purchase life insurance, set up trust funds, use estate planning, legal and tax services. In other words, the rich are a lifetime revenue stream for banks. That's why banks prioritize them. It's not favoritism, it's pure profit logic. I used to think banks were fair places. If you could prove your income, you'd get support. But in reality, income is a short-term value. Assets are long-term value. Banks choose the latter. This favoritism isn't emotional, it's about math. The less risky and more asset-backed you are, the more banks compete to lend you money. So if you want to borrow like the rich, start thinking like them. Build assets first, then leverage credit. Die isn't the end, it's the ultimate tax escape. For most people, death is the end of the story. But for the wealthy, it's a perfect reset button, one that not only brings peace, but also passes down tax-free wealth to the next generation. Here's how. 1. Step up in basis, the trick that erases capital gains taxes. Under US tax law and in many developed countries, when someone passes away, all their assets are revalued to the current market price at death. This is called the step up in basis. Example, a Jewish businessman buys $1 million worth of Google stock. 30 years later, it's worth $10 million. He never sells. No one pays taxes on the $9 million gain when he dies, as long as he held the stock until death. The heirs inherit the asset at a new cost of $10 million. If they sell it the next day, they owe zero capital gains tax. This step-up eliminates up to 20 to 30% in taxes on decades of growth, legally. 2. Using life insurance to wipe out debt before death. The wealthy rarely pay off their debts while alive. Instead, they continue to borrow, refinance, and leverage their assets to enjoy life fully. But before death, they usually set up life insurance policies worth tens of millions, owned by irrevocable trusts. What happens after they die? The insurance payout is tax-free. The trust uses the funds to pay off all outstanding loans. The heirs receive the remaining assets, debt-free, tax-free, and risk-free. It's the perfect final move in the buy, borrow, die strategy. When I first learned about the step-up in basis, I was stunned. Not because it's a loophole, but because it's legal, public, and built for asset holders. But for the rest of us, small assets, enormous debts, death often passes down burdens, not wealth. One question I keep asking myself is, which rule book am I playing by? The rules of the worker or the rules of the owner? If you spend your life earning a salary, saving what's left and dying with a modest nest egg, maybe the game was never fair to begin with. Plan like the rich, even if you're not rich yet. We might not be millionaires. We may not own multi-million-dollar properties or Amazon shares like billionaires. But that doesn't mean we can't think like them. The fundamental difference between the wealthy and the rest isn't just about asset numbers. It's about long-term financial planning. And here's the good news. You don't need to be rich to start acting like the rich. 1. Build an asset portfolio, not a pile of cash. The wealthy don't hold cash, they hold assets. And even with a modest income, you can still shift a portion of your savings into appreciating assets. Low-cost ETFs like S&P 500, VN30. Long-term mutual funds, physical gold or digital gold accounts. Stocks of stable companies. Even a few dollars a month puts you on the same trajectory as high-level investors. 2. Avoid selling assets. Focus on long-term leverage. The lesson from Buy, Borrow, Die isn't to borrow $500,000 and gamble on real estate. It's about understanding this core idea. Don't sell valuable assets just for short-term spending. Let your assets grow over time. Meanwhile, you can increase income through skills, jobs, or freelancing. Use debt selectively for education, tools, or anything that increases future income. The key: never borrow for vanity, but don't hesitate to borrow for growth. 3. Use insurance as a financial shield, not just a safety net. The rich don't buy insurance out of fear. They use it as an innovative wealth transfer tool. What about you? Life insurance to protect your family if something goes wrong, health insurance so illness doesn't derail your plans, maybe even explore investment-linked policies, a hybrid of saving plus protection. Each small step builds a solid foundation, just like the wealthy do. I used to think, that's only for the ultra-rich, it's out of my league. But that mindset kept me in survival mode, living paycheck to paycheck. Then I started doing small things, buying just 1 gram of gold each month, setting up an auto-investing account, reading finance books, learning negotiation skills. And that's when I realized I wasn't rich yet, but I was learning how to be. And sometimes that's the most powerful place to start. Conclusion: the game isn't fair, but you can still play smart. We've just explored the financial strategy known as Buy, Borrow, Die, a perfectly legal loophole in the system that only works if you own sizable assets. Let's be honest, this financial game wasn't designed for everyone. It favors those who already have ownership, access, and understanding. The rules aren't fair. The wealthy can borrow cheap money using their assets as collateral, avoid taxes on unrealized gains, pass down fortunes tax-free with the right estate planning. Meanwhile, most of us are still paying after-tax interest on homes we don't fully own because, let's face it, the bank still holds the title. But here's the truth. Unfair doesn't mean powerless. The most significant difference between those who win and those who lose isn't the hand they're dealt. It's how they play their cards. You don't have to be Elon Musk to learn how not to rely on earned income. You don't need $100 million to accumulate and hold assets long-term, and you don't need to get rich first before thinking about financial planning, because planning is what gets you closer to wealth. So how do you play smarter? Prioritize asset accumulation over consumption stocks, gold, a rental unit, or even high-value skills that make you more valuable over time. Avoid bad debt. Master good debt. Debt for consumption is a trap, but growth debt, when used wisely, is a powerful tool. Understand tax laws, at least the basics. Knowing concepts like income tax, capital gains, or tax-deferred retirement accounts puts you ahead of 80% of the population. Think long-term and prepare for legacy. Even if legacy feels far off, planning early ensures your next generation doesn't start from zero. I'm not rich, but I've learned this. The rich aren't hiding secrets. They just live by rules that most people ignore or don't have the patience to follow. And once I started modeling their thinking, step by step, my financial life began to change. I stopped chasing paychecks. I started building, not just spending. So now the question is, will you play by emotion or play with strategy? Will you complain about the unfair rules or leverage knowledge to move smarter? The system isn't fair, but that doesn't stop you from becoming someone who knows the rules and uses them to build a freer, more intentional life. If you found this content helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone else who's ready to play the money game smarter. I'll be right here, walking this journey with you.